December 14th, 1978. Ace Frehley unplugged his Les Paul in the middle of a recording session and walked out of Electric Lady Studios, leaving Paul Stanley standing alone in the control room, wondering what had gone wrong. What happened in the next 2 hours revealed something about both men that even their closest bandmates never fully understood. The legendary Electric Lady Studios in Greenwich Village was humming with creative energy that winter evening. Kiss was riding an unprecedented wave of success following the simultaneous release of 4 solo albums just months earlier. The bold move had paid off spectacularly, with each member proving they could stand on their own. But Ace's album had done something nobody expected. It had outsold the others. His cover of New York Groove was climbing the charts, becoming an actual radio hit, something Kiss hadn't achieved in quite some time. Now the band was back together, working on their next group album, trying to recapture the magic, while pretending that nothing had changed. Except everything had changed. The studio was set up in Studio A, the largest room with the deep purple and blue lighting that gave the place its mystical atmosphere. Ace arrived first that evening, which was unusual. He was carrying his silver sparkle Les Paul Custom, the one with the 3 humbuckers that had become his signature. He seemed different somehow, more confident maybe, or perhaps more distant. When Paul walked in 30 minutes later, dressed in his usual carefully selected outfit, his hair perfectly styled even for a recording session, he sensed the shift immediately. Paul Stanley had always been the front man, the voice of Kiss, the one who commanded the stage and made the connections with the audience. He was used to being the emotional center of the band. "Hey, Ace," Paul said, his voice carrying that familiar warmth he used with bandmates. "Ready to lay down some magic tonight?" "Yeah," Ace replied. But there was something flat in his tone, something Paul couldn't quite identify. They'd chosen to work on a new track, something that would showcase the band's heavier side. The arrangement called for layered guitars, with Ace's lead work sitting on top of rhythm tracks. It was the classic Kiss formula, the sound that had made them famous. The engineer got levels, and they started running through the basic structure. Paul was in the control room, listening carefully, making suggestions about tempo and feel. Ace was in the main room, his Les Paul plugged into a Marshall stack, the same setup he'd used for years. The first take sounded good. Ace's playing was precise. His tone was thick and punchy, exactly what the song needed. But something was missing. That spark, that spontaneous creativity that made Ace's solos memorable, wasn't there. "Let's try it again," the producer suggested. "Maybe open up the solo section a bit more. Give Ace some room to breathe." They rolled tape again. This time when they reached the solo section, Ace started playing something different. Not the carefully arranged part they'd discussed, but something more experimental, more jazz-influenced, with unexpected chord voicings and melodic turns that didn't quite fit the straightforward rock structure of the song. Paul's brow furrowed in the control room. He pressed the talkback button. "Ace, that's interesting, but I think we need to stick closer to what we worked out. Keep it more in the pocket, you know?" In the studio, Ace stopped playing. His face was hidden behind his black-rimmed glasses, but Paul could see his jaw tighten. "Sure," Ace said. "Whatever you want." They tried it a third time. Now Ace played exactly what had been arranged, note for note. But somehow it sounded mechanical, lifeless. All the personality had been drained out of it. Paul felt frustration building. This wasn't working. Ace was capable of brilliant things, they all knew that. His solo album had proven it beyond any doubt. So why was this session feeling so forced? Hold on, Paul said into the talkback. Let's take a minute and talk about this. He walked out into the main studio room. Ace was standing by his amp, adjusting knobs that didn't need adjusting. What's going on, man? Paul asked. You're playing great technically, but it feels like you're not really here. I'm here, Ace said, not looking up from his amp. Are you? Paul pressed. Because it feels like you're just going through the motions. Maybe that's all this needs, Ace said, and there was an edge in his voice now. Just go through the motions, play the part, be the space ace. Paul felt something cold settle in his stomach. That's not what I meant, isn't it? Ace finally looked at him. Isn't that what this whole thing is? You tell me what to play, how to play it, when to play it. I just put on the makeup and hit the marks. That's not fair, Paul said. We've always collaborated on everything. Have we? Ace's voice was getting louder now. Or have Gene and you made the decisions, and the rest of us just followed along? Because from where I'm standing, that's how it's always been. Paul felt his own frustration rising. If you had a problem with how things were working, you should have said something years ago. I did, Ace said, multiple times. Nobody listened. The engineer in the control room was suddenly very interested in his console, trying to give them privacy while being unable to actually leave. The tension in the studio was thick enough to touch. You know what the difference is between this session and my solo album? Ace continued. On my album, I got to make the choices. I got to play what I felt. I got to be a musician, not just the guy in the space makeup who plays the parts he's told to play. We've never treated you like that, Paul said. But even as the words came out, he wondered if they were true. Ace didn't respond. Instead, he reached down and unplugged his Les Paul from the amp. The sudden silence was deafening. What are you doing? Paul asked. Need some air, Ace said. He put his guitar on its stand, carefully, almost tenderly, the same way he always treated his instruments. Then he walked toward the studio door. Ace, come on, Paul called after him. We can talk about this. But Ace was already gone, the heavy studio door closing behind him with a solid thunk that seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. Paul stood there, his heart pounding, completely unsure of what had just happened. The engineer's voice came quietly from the control room. Should I keep the tape rolling? Paul shook his head, then realized the engineer couldn't see him. No, he said. No, shut it down. Paul's first instinct was to let Ace cool off, to give him space. That's what he would have done a year ago. But something about this felt different, more serious. Ace wasn't just frustrated with a recording session. This was something deeper, something that had been building for a long time. Paul grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. The December night air hit him like a slap when he stepped outside. Electric Lady Studios was on 8th Street, and even at night, the village was alive with people, music spilling out of clubs, the smell of pizza and exhaust and possibility. Paul looked around, trying to figure out where Ace might have gone. Then he saw him, about half a block down, sitting on the hood of his car, a black Cadillac that looked like something from a science fiction movie. Ace was staring up at the city sky, which was never truly dark in New York, always reflecting the lights back down in a perpetual orange glow. Paul walked slowly down the sidewalk, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. When he got close, he stopped, unsure of what to say. Ace didn't look at him, just kept staring up. Can't really see the stars here, Ace said quietly. too much light pollution. All those stars are up there, billions of them, but we can't see them because we're too busy shining our own lights everywhere. Paul didn't know what to say to that, so he just climbed up and sat on the hood next to Ace. They sat in silence for almost a minute. Two rock stars in the middle of Greenwich Village, sitting on a car hood like teenagers. "I'm sorry," Paul finally said. Ace glanced at him, but didn't respond. "I mean it," Paul continued. "If I've been controlling, if I haven't listened to your ideas, if I've made you feel like just another piece of the machine, I'm genuinely sorry. That wasn't my intention." Ace let out a long breath. "I know it wasn't. That's what makes it harder. You and Gene, you're not trying to be assholes. You just genuinely believe you know what's best for the band." "And maybe you do," Paul said. "But that doesn't mean we should ignore what you think, what you want to contribute." "You want to know what really happened with my solo album?" Ace asked. Paul nodded. "I was terrified," Ace admitted. "Absolutely terrified. Because for the first time, I couldn't hide behind the band, couldn't let Gene and you make the decisions and take the heat if things went wrong. It was just me. My choices, my vision, my responsibility. And it was the most liberating thing I've ever experienced," Ace said, and Paul could hear the emotion in his voice. "I got to choose the songs, choose the musicians, choose the sound. And when New York Groove started climbing the charts, when my album started outselling the others, it proved something I always wondered about." "What's that?" Paul asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "That I'm not just the Space Ace character you created," Ace said. "I'm a real musician with real ideas and real talent. Paul, I can write songs and make hit records without the Kiss makeup and without someone telling me what to do every step of the way." Paul felt those words hit him like physical blows, not because they were meant to hurt, but because they were true. "We did create the Space Ace character, didn't we?" Paul said slowly. "We designed the makeup, the costume, the persona, and somewhere along the way, I think I started seeing that character instead of seeing you, the real you." Ace turned to look at him directly. "Do you know what it's like to be successful at something and still feel invisible? To sell out arenas and have millions of fans but know that they're not really seeing you? They're seeing a character, a costume, a carefully crafted image, and the people you work with, your own bandmates, they're seeing that character too." "I see you," Paul said. "Do you?" Ace challenged. "Or do you see the guy who's supposed to play the guitar parts you and Gene approve of? The guy who's supposed to show up on time, put on the makeup, and not cause problems?" Paul wanted to argue, to defend himself, but he couldn't. Because looking back honestly at the last few years, that's exactly how he'd been treating Ace, and Peter too, probably. The two of them were the rhythm section, the supporting players, while he and Gene were the leaders, the decision-makers, the creative forces. Except that wasn't true anymore, if it ever had been. Ace's solo album had proven that he was every bit as creative and commercially viable as any of them. "You want to know the truth?" Paul said. "The real truth that I haven't told anyone?" Ace waited. "When your album started doing better than mine, better than all of ours, my first feeling wasn't pride or happiness for you," Paul admitted. "It was jealousy and fear." Ace looked genuinely surprised. "Fear of what?" "Fear that you didn't need us anymore," Paul said. "Fear that you'd realize you could have a successful career without Kiss, without the makeup, without Gene and me calling the shots. Fear that we'd lose you and it would be my fault, because I'd spent so long treating you like a supporting player instead of the star you are." Ace was quiet for a long moment. I don't want to leave KISS, he finally said. But I don't want to be invisible in KISS either. I don't want to be the guy who just plays the parts he's told to play. I want to contribute. I want my ideas to matter. I want to feel like a partner, not an employee. You're right, Paul said, and I'm going to do better. We're going to do better. But I need you to help me. I need you to call me out when I'm being controlling, when I'm not listening. Because I swear to you, it's not intentional. It's how I learned to lead, to keep things organized, to make sure everything runs smoothly. But smooth isn't always right. They sat on that car hood for another 20 minutes, talking more honestly than they had in years. Paul told Ace about his own insecurities, about feeling like he had to be perfect all the time, had to have all the answers, had to be the leader even when he didn't know what he was doing. Ace talked about growing up in the Bronx, about learning to play guitar in a basement, about how music was the only place he'd ever felt truly confident, and how frustrating it was to feel that confidence being slowly eroded by the dynamics of the band. It's funny, Paul said as they finally climbed down from the car hood. All this time I've been trying to be the strong leader, the guy who has all the answers. But maybe what the band really needs is for me to admit I don't have all the answers. Maybe we're stronger when we're actually collaborating instead of just following a hierarchy. They walked back to Electric Lady Studios together, and when they came through the door, the engineer looked relieved. "Thought you guys might have called it a night," he said. "Not yet," Ace replied, picking up his Les Paul. "But we're going to try something different." Paul settled into the control room while Ace got his sound dialed in. "Okay," the engineer said. "Same song, same arrangement?" "No," Ace said. "I want to try something." He looked at Paul through the control room window. "If that's okay with you," Paul pressed the talkback. "It's your solo, man. Play what you feel." What came out over the next 15 minutes was completely different from anything they'd attempted earlier that night. Ace abandoned the structured solo they'd planned, and instead played something that was part blues, part jazz, part pure emotion. It didn't fit the traditional KISS formula, but it was brilliant, raw, and honest, and undeniably Ace. When he finished, there was silence in the control room. Then the producer, who'd been standing quietly in the corner, spoke up. "That," he said, "is a hit. That's the sound of someone playing without fear, without holding back. That's special." Paul was nodding. "That's what I hear when I hear your solo album," he said into the talkback. "That's the real Ace Frehley. Not the guy playing what he thinks he's supposed to play, but the guy playing what's in his heart." They worked for another 3 hours that night, and it was some of the best recording either of them had done. The dynamic had shifted. Instead of Paul directing and Ace following, they were truly collaborating, bouncing ideas off each other, building something together that neither could have created alone. When the session finally wrapped around 2 in the morning, they walked out into the cold December night together. "Thanks," Ace said, "for coming after me, for listening." "Thanks for being honest," Paul replied, "for not just swallowing your frustration and letting it poison everything, for demanding to be treated like the partner you are." They shook hands, and there was something different in that handshake, a new understanding, a new respect. That night, Paul sat in his apartment and wrote in the journal he kept sporadically. The entry for December 14th, 1978 was one of the longest he'd ever written, and one of the most honest. "Today I learned something crucial about leadership," he wrote. "It's not about having all the answers or making all the decisions. It's about recognizing the talents of the people around you and giving them room to shine. I've been so focused on being the face of KISS, the voice, the leader, that I lost sight of what makes us great. We're great because of the combination of talents, not in spite of them. Ace walked out of a session tonight, and I followed him, not because I thought I could fix things, but because I needed to understand what was wrong. What I discovered is that I'd been so busy protecting the Kiss brand and maintaining the hierarchy that I'd stopped seeing Ace as a partner and started seeing him as a role player. His solo album's success scared me because it meant he didn't need us. But that fear was backwards. The fact that each of us can be successful individually makes us stronger together, not weaker. We don't need to hold each other back to keep the band together. We need to lift each other up. I hope I remember this. I hope when I'm in the control room and Ace is trying something unexpected, I remember tonight. I remember that the best art comes from freedom, not control. I remember that my job isn't to limit the band's creativity, but to help channel it and amplify it. The recording session on December 14th became legendary among those who were there, though the full story didn't come out until years later. The track they recorded that night ended up on the next Kiss album and became a fan favorite, with critics specifically noting the unusual solo work and emotional depth. For Ace Frehley, that night represented a turning point. In later interviews, when asked about the creative tensions within Kiss, he would say things like, "Paul and I had to learn to really listen to each other. Once we did, the music got better." When pressed for details, he'd just smile and say, "We had a moment of truth. We saw each other clearly." The lesson from that December night isn't just about Ace and Paul, or even about Kiss. It's about the universal experience of feeling unseen, of having your contributions undervalued, of being reduced to a role instead of being recognized as a whole person. Two of the most successful rock musicians of their generation stood in a parking lot in Greenwich Village and confessed to each other their deepest insecurities. Ace admitted he felt invisible despite the fame. Paul admitted he felt terrified of losing control despite the success. And in that confession, in that vulnerability, they found something more valuable than any hit record. They found genuine partnership. They found the understanding that leadership isn't about control, it's about collaboration. They found the courage to see each other as real people, not just as roles in a carefully constructed image. The Space Ace character would continue. The makeup and costumes and stage personas would remain. But the relationship between Paul Stanley and Ace Frehley had fundamentally changed. They'd torn down the wall between leader and follower and rebuilt it as a bridge between equals. That bridge wouldn't last forever. The pressures of fame, the demons of addiction, the relentless grind of the music industry would eventually take their toll. But for a while, for a precious moment in time, two men who'd been playing roles even with each other found a way to be real. And the music they made in that space of authenticity remains some of the most powerful work either of them ever did.